Operation Paperclip, Part 1. The Photograph That Shouldn't Exist. Washington, D.C., February 1952. The photograph arrived in an unmarked envelope. No return address, no letter. Just a single glossy print, the kind that smelled faintly of fixer and stale cigarette smoke. Emily Ross stared at it beneath the dim desk lamp, the shadows bending across her cluttered newsroom desk. The Washington Sentinel's office had gone quiet hours ago, save for the low hum of the heating pipes and the distant rattle of a typewriter 2 rooms away. She leaned closer. The picture showed a group of men in lab coats, standing in front of a massive metallic cylinder. Behind them, stenciled in block letters, was a name she couldn't quite make out. Something ending in "Dine." Her eyes caught on one face. The man on the far right, half smiling, wore the unmistakable insignia of the Third Reich on his lapel. But this wasn't a wartime photograph. No, she could tell by the American flag barely visible behind him and the faint outline of the U.S. Air Force patch on another man's sleeve. The date scribbled on the back read, Fort Bliss, Texas, 1947. Emily's heartbeat quickened. She knew the rumors. Everyone in Washington did. Whispers of German scientists quietly brought into the United States after the war. Men who'd worked for Hitler, designing rockets that rained down on London, now wearing American uniforms. The government called it scientific exchange. Others called it something darker. She dropped the photo onto her desk and exhaled. What if it was true? What if the men responsible for the V-2 bombings, the very architects of terror, were now building America's future? She lit a cigarette, the smoke curling through the lamp's light. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd start digging. The Cold War's quiet beginning. In 1952, the world was trembling on the edge of something new. The war was over, but its ghosts were everywhere. In the ruins of Berlin, in the laboratories of Los Alamos, in the hearts of men who'd traded one ideology for another. America was no longer the innocent victor. It was a superpower, staring down the Soviet Union in a race for the skies. Rockets, satellites, missiles. Whoever reached space first would own the future. And somewhere in that race, hidden behind layers of classified memos and polished speeches, was Operation Paperclip, a program so secret most members of Congress didn't even know it existed. Over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians had been smuggled into the United States since 1945. Some had been devoted Nazis. Many had built weapons for Hitler's regime. Now, they were working for the U.S. Army, Air Force, and even NASA's predecessor, the NACA. Their leader, a charismatic rocket engineer named Wernher von Braun, had once dreamed of sending men to the moon. But under Hitler, his rockets had carried explosives instead of astronauts. To the public, von Braun was soon to be a hero. To Emily Ross, he was a question mark she couldn't ignore.
Chapter 2. The File Room. Emily's press credentials got her into places most reporters never saw. Senate basements, military briefings, and once, accidentally, a CIA luncheon she still wasn't sure she hadn't dreamed. But the Army Archives in Arlington were different. The clerk behind the desk, a heavy-set man with wire-rimmed glasses, barely looked up when she handed over her authorization slip. Ross, Emily, Washington Sentinel, she said. Researching post-war scientific programs. The man scanned the paper, frowned, and disappeared into a back room. She glanced around. The walls smelled of dust and old ink. Rows of gray filing cabinets stood like tombstones under flickering lights. When he returned, he carried a slim brown folder, marked Project 63. "This is all I could find," he said, sliding it across the counter. The label was faint, the corners brittle. Emily opened it carefully. Inside were photocopies, memos stamped Top Secret, Declassified 1951. Her pulse jumped as she read. Subject: Transfer of key German technical personnel to U.S. Army facilities, Fort Bliss, TX, and White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico. Objectives include the advancement of rocket and guided missile research in support of future defense initiatives. And then a list of names. She recognized one immediately: Dr. Werner Magnus Maximilian Freiherr von Braun. At the bottom of the page, handwritten in blue ink, was something chilling. Previous affiliation: SS Sturmbannführer, Major, Nazi Party member 1850688. Emily stared at the words, the air thick in her throat. The same man who had worn the SS uniform was now leading America's missile program. She looked up. "Has this been made public?" The clerk blinked. "Ma'am, that folder isn't supposed to exist."
The informant. That night, Emily met her source in a diner off Constitution Avenue. It was raining, and the neon sign outside flickered in the puddles. The man waiting for her wore a trench coat that looked one war too old. He called himself Hawthorne. She doubted it was his real name. "You got the photo?" he said, sliding into the booth opposite her. "I did," Emily replied. "Where did you get it?" He stirred his coffee, eyes scanning the window. "Let's just say I used to file the wrong reports for the right reasons." "Operation Paperclip," she said. "It's real, isn't it?" Hawthorne smiled thinly. "Real? It's the foundation of your new American science. Those men built the V-2 rockets. You remember London? Whole neighborhoods leveled. Now we've given them clean lab coats and citizenship papers. The Army calls them assets. I call them something else." Emily leaned forward. "Why? Why bring them here?" "Because the Soviets were doing the same. You think we could afford to lose? We're building rockets that can reach Moscow in 30 minutes. You think anyone in the Pentagon cares who built them?" She shivered. Hawthorne slid a folded paper toward her, a copied memorandum dated 1946, signed by a familiar name, Major General Leslie Groves, the same man who had directed the Manhattan Project. "It is imperative that these scientists be retained by the United States for the benefit of national security. Their ideological history shall be sanitized to ensure public acceptability." Emily read it twice. Sanitized? Means erased. Files rewritten, past scrubbed clean. By the time you read their biographies in the newspapers, they'll sound like choir boys who just happened to build missiles for Hitler. He stood, dropping a few bills on the table. "Careful, Miss Ross. The truth has a way of disappearing, and so do the people who look too closely at it." Then he was gone, leaving only the smell of rain and stale tobacco.
Chapter 3: A Rocket to the Future. The story could make her career or end it. Emily knew that. But as she typed her notes back at the Sentinel, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something much larger than journalism. She began to cross-reference every name from the Project 63 file. One after another, the same pattern emerged. Men who had once built weapons for the Reich, now working for the U.S. Army Ballistic Missile Agency. Some even teaching at American universities. The more she uncovered, the more surreal it felt. Von Braun himself had become a minor celebrity. There were photos of him shaking hands with generals, smiling for magazine covers, even appearing in newsreels about America's rocket future. None mentioned the SS uniform he once wore. But someone had gone to great lengths to make sure of that. In one State Department memo, she found a note. Public exposure of scientists' prior affiliations may jeopardize national interests. Journalistic inquiries to be discouraged. Discouraged. That word made her blood boil. By the time dawn filtered through her window, Emily Ross had made up her mind. She was going to publish the truth, whatever it cost her. The hook tightens. 2 days later, as she walked to her car after work, she noticed a black sedan idling across the street. She hesitated. The driver's window rolled down just enough for her to glimpse the end of a cigarette glowing inside. She turned away, pretending not to notice, but the sound of the engine followed her as she drove home. At her apartment building, she checked her mailbox, empty except for a single envelope. Typed label, no return address. Inside, one sentence on plain paper.
Operation Paperclip, Part 2, The Desert of Secrets. El Paso, Texas, March 1952. The desert stretched endlessly outside the train window, a pale, sun-bleached ocean of dust and distant mountains. Emily Ross pressed her palm to the glass, feeling the rhythmic thrum of the rails beneath her. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay White Sands Proving Ground, the heart of America's rocket program. And, if her sources were right, the heart of something far darker. Her editor had wanted to kill the story. It's Cold War paranoia, he'd said, rubbing his temples. If the government's keeping secrets, they've got a reason. Don't turn this paper into another Red Scare tabloid. But Emily couldn't shake the photograph. That single image of German scientists smiling in front of an American flag. So she took a week's leave, packed a notebook, a camera, and the kind of determination that had made her the youngest investigative reporter in Washington. The train hissed to a stop in El Paso. The air hit her like a furnace. She rented a dusty Ford from a man who spoke little English, but seemed to know more than he said. "White Sands?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "Research work," she lied. He grunted. "Be careful. Sometimes people go there and don't come back." The road to Fort Bliss. The road from El Paso to Fort Bliss cut through a landscape that felt older than time. Mesas like giant stone ships, cactus shadows stretching like sundials. But as she neared the army base, the ancient silence was broken by the hum of engines and the gleam of new metal. Fort Bliss was a contradiction. Barbed wire and sunshine. Science and secrecy. The guards checked her credentials twice before letting her through the outer gate. She'd arranged an interview under the pretense of writing a human interest story on America's new rocket pioneers. A young lieutenant with freckles and too much enthusiasm greeted her. "Miss Ross, welcome to Fort Bliss. You'll be speaking with Dr. Frederick Strom." "Dr. Strom?" she asked, scanning her notes. "I don't have that name." "He's new. Huntsville. He's one of our best." They led her through a maze of low buildings, each humming with activity. Inside one, she glimpsed long tables filled with blueprints, engines, and chalkboards scrawled with equations. The air smelled of oil and ozone. Dr. Strom was tall, thin, with silver hair combed neatly back. His accent betrayed his origins before he even spoke. "Miss Ross, a pleasure. You are writing about the American rocket dream, yes?" "That's right." "How it all began?" He smiled faintly. "It began in Germany. Now it continues here." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. A slip of the tongue. As they walked the testing grounds, Emily took notes, her eyes darting to every face, every insignia. She saw men speaking in clipped German to one another,
engineers with names like Obendorf, Schilling, and Gerstenmaier. One technician, noticing her notepad, turned away quickly. Dr. Strom noticed. "They are shy," he said. "Many of them have, past associations that make publicity unpleasant." Emily stopped walking. "You mean Nazi affiliations?" His smile froze. For a second, she thought he might have her escorted out. Then, carefully, he said, "History is a matter of perspective, Miss Ross. The war is over. We are all working for peace now." Peace, she thought bitterly, built on the same rockets that once destroyed London. A whisper in the wind tunnel. That night, unable to sleep in the cheap motel outside town, Emily sat on her bed and reviewed her notes. Most of what she'd seen at Fort Bliss was impressive, the technology decades ahead of anything the public knew. But what unsettled her wasn't what she saw, it was what she wasn't supposed to. The next morning, she bribed a janitor with $10 to let her into one of the older hangars. It smelled of dust and chemicals. She slipped through a side door and found herself in a cavernous wind tunnel chamber. A man stood near a control panel, smoking a cigarette. When he saw her, he stiffened, then relaxed slightly. "You are not supposed to be here," he said in a soft German accent. "I'm a journalist," Emily admitted. "I'm writing about the rocket program." He glanced toward the door, then back at her. "You should not write too much." "Why?" she pressed. "What are they hiding?" The man hesitated. Then he exhaled and spoke quietly. "They told us America was freedom, but freedom here has a price. They erased everything, our papers, our past, our guilt. They think that makes us clean, but it does not." He crushed the cigarette under his heel. "Von Braun calls it redemption. I call it amnesia." Before she could ask more, a shout echoed from the hall. "Dr. Koenig, are you in there?" The man's face drained of color. "Go, now." She slipped out through a side exit just as two MPs entered the room. Her pulse thundered. She didn't know who Dr. Koenig was, but she knew she'd just found someone who wanted to tell the truth.
The Desert Files. Back in El Paso, Emily sent a coded telegram to Hawthorne in D.C. Found confirmation of paperclip at Fort Bliss. Request additional files. Need Koenig records. The reply came 2 days later, slipped under her motel door. No name, no return address, just a single sentence typed in red ink. Koenig dead. Accident at test site. Leave now. Emily's hands trembled. She turned on the radio for background noise. A local news station was reporting a testing mishap at White Sands that morning. One German engineer killed instantly when a fuel tank exploded. She didn't need to hear the name to know who it was. The widow's house. But Emily wasn't the kind to walk away. Instead, she drove to Las Cruces, following a tip from a sympathetic clerk who whispered that Koenig had lived there under an American alias, Frank King. The small adobe house stood at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by scrub and silence. A woman answered the door, her eyes red-rimmed but wary. "Mrs. Koenig?" Emily asked softly. The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Who are you?" "A friend of your husband's work," Emily said. "I'm sorry for your loss." The widow's expression hardened. "If you're from the army, I have nothing more to say." "I'm not. I'm a journalist. I think your husband was trying to tell the truth." The woman's shoulders sagged. "He wanted to, but they watched him. They watched all of them." She motioned Emily inside. The living room was sparse. A few photographs, a half-empty whiskey bottle, and on the wall, a framed image of a rocket launch.
"My husband kept something," the widow said, lowering her voice. "He said if anything happened to him, someone should know." From a drawer, she pulled out a small notebook wrapped in a handkerchief. The cover read, Vergeltungswaffe, or Vengeance Weapon. Emily opened it. Inside were sketches of rocket engines labeled in both German and English, alongside cryptic notes. Fort Bliss test results identical to Peenemünde 1944. U.S. Army request omission of origin. Files redacted. K. There was also a list of code names: Project Hermes, Project Range, Project Paperclip, and a line that made her blood run cold. Subjects transferred to Huntsville. New identity protocols in effect. Washington approval. Signed, A.D. A.D.? Emily whispered. Mrs. Koenig nodded. That's what frightened him most. He said it stood for Alan Dulles. The man who knew too much. By the time Emily returned to her motel, the sun had set behind the Organ Mountains. She poured herself a glass of bourbon she didn't want and stared at the notebook. Dulles, the name echoed in her mind, the newly appointed director of the CIA. If Koenig's notes were true, this wasn't just an army cover-up. It reached all the way to the top of American intelligence. She began typing her story. The clatter of the typewriter filled the room like gunfire. In the shadow of victory, America has made a Faustian bargain, a pact written not in ink, but in secrecy. The same men who built Hitler's weapons of terror now build the rockets that will define our future. A knock interrupted her. She froze. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. "Who is it?" she called. Silence. Then a voice. Calm, American, male. "Miss Ross, it's the Army. We'd like a word." She looked toward the window. A dark sedan sat under the streetlight, the same one she'd seen back in Washington. Emily grabbed the notebook, stuffed it into her suitcase, and climbed out the bathroom window. Flight into the desert. The night air was dry and electric. She ran across the empty parking lot, gravel crunching under her shoes, and slipped behind a parked truck. The motel room door burst open, 2 men in plain suits scanning the darkness. "Ross couldn't have gone far," one said. "Search the lot." She waited until they moved past, then sprinted toward the highway. Her car was parked half a mile away. Every sound felt amplified, the chirp of crickets, the wind through the mesquite. When she finally reached the Ford, her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the keys twice before getting it started. Headlights flared behind her. She floored the accelerator. The road stretched into nothingness, a black ribbon through the desert. Behind her, the headlights followed, steady, relentless. For the first time, Emily Ross truly understood what Hawthorne had meant. The truth didn't just disappear. It erased the people who found it.
Operation Paperclip, Part 3, The City of Tomorrow. Highway 70, New Mexico, March 1952. The desert had swallowed the night. Emily's headlights carved thin tunnels through the darkness as the miles slid beneath her tires. Behind her, no sign of the black sedan, just the wind and the smell of hot dust. By dawn, she reached a truck stop outside Alamogordo and parked beside a line of tankers streaked with red clay. Inside, the coffee tasted like motor oil, but it steadied her hands. She spread Koenig's notebook on the counter and traced the words, "Subjects transferred to Huntsville, Alabama." That was the next step, if she could reach it before the men in suits reached her. A message from Hawthorne. The payphone rattled when she dropped in a dime. "Operator, connect me to Washington, D.C. Person to person, Hawthorne." It rang 5 times before a voice answered. Department of Agriculture. She almost hung up until the voice added quietly,
The corn grows tall this year. It was the code phrase. Hawthorne, it's Ross. They're on to me. Koenig's dead. His notes mention Dulles and Huntsville. A pause. You're in deep, kid. Huntsville's no ordinary base. It's where the Germans became Americans. You'll need cover. I've already burned mine. He sighed. Then listen. Find a man named Captain Jack McKenna, Army Public Information. He's not one of them. Tell him I sent you. The line clicked dead. Emily hung up slowly, pocketed the notebook, and walked back into the rising heat. The next train east left at noon. Huntsville, Alabama, 3 days later. Huntsville looked, at first glance, like any southern town. Brick storefronts, magnolia trees, kids riding bicycles down cracked sidewalks. But above the roofs rose the silver skeletons of hangars and test towers. Locals called it the Rocket City. Emily checked into a boarding house under a false name, Ellen Reed, freelance writer. From her window, she could see the perimeter fence of the Redstone Arsenal shimmering in the afternoon heat. At night, the sky lit up with distant flashes, test firings that made the windows rattle. The next morning, she walked to the Arsenal's main gate carrying her old press badge and a smile she didn't feel. "Miss Reed, Washington Courier, feature on the space program," she told the guard. After 20 minutes of phone calls and skeptical looks, a jeep arrived, driven by a sandy-haired officer in rolled-up sleeves. "Captain Jack McKenna," he said. "You're the reporter giving my colonel headaches. Let's get you your tour."
The tour. The inside of Redstone Arsenal was like another country. Concrete bunkers, launch pads, rows of gleaming engines under tarps. Everywhere she looked, men with German accents moved between workshops. McKenna watched her eyes. "You were expecting cowboys, huh?" "I wasn't expecting Berlin." He laughed, but there was tension behind it. "Yeah, it's strange. Half these guys were enemy officers 7 years ago. Now they're designing missiles for Uncle Sam. Don't print that." "I thought the program was public." "Parts of it. The rest, classified. Washington calls it Project Hermes. They're building the Redstone rocket. Range 200 miles. Someday they'll reach the moon. Or Moscow," she said. His smile faded. "Depends who you ask." They passed a group of scientists gathered round a chalkboard. In the center stood a tall man with slick-back hair, speaking rapid German, the others nodding. "That's him," McKenna said quietly. "Von Braun." Von Braun looked every bit the movie star. Immaculate suit, cigarette balanced between long fingers, charm radiating like heat. Emily felt a chill. Here he was, the man from Koenig's notes. Von Braun turned, noticed her, and smiled as though greeting an old friend. "Ah, a visitor. The American press always arrives at the right moment." His English was perfect. "I'm writing about the future of rocketry," Emily said. "Excellent. The future is what we built here. The past," he waved his hand dismissively, "is only fuel for the engines of tomorrow." Lunch with McKenna. They ate in the officers' canteen, a converted warehouse that smelled of coffee and oil. McKenna leaned close. "Whatever you're chasing, tread light. I like my job." "I'm chasing the truth," she said. He stirred his coffee. "Truth's a luxury in this town. D.C. wants heroes, not history. Von Braun's face will be on every magazine cover next year. He's the man who'll take America to the stars." Emily pulled Koenig's notebook from her bag, opening to the page marked A.D. "Do you know this signature?" He squinted. "Allen Dulles? Jesus, lady, how'd you get this?" "From a dead man." McKenna's knuckles whitened around his cup. "Then we both need to be careful." The file room again. That night, McKenna slipped her into the base's record building after hours. 10 minutes, he whispered. You saw nothing. The air smelled of paper and oil. Row after row of cabinets, labels, and tidy military script. Emily searched for the H section, Hermes, Huntsville, history, until she found a folder marked Personnel Transfers, 1946. Inside, photographs identical to the one that had started it all. Men in lab coats at Fort Bliss. Typed beneath each photo a new American name beside the original German one. Hans Koenig to Frank King. Ernst Schilling to Ernest Stone. Wilhelm Jaeger to William Hunter. Reinvention by paperwork. At the bottom, a memo stamped CIA clearance authorized. AD, February 1947. Emily snapped a photograph with her miniature camera, heart hammering. A floorboard creaked. McKenna's whisper, "Someone's coming." They ducked behind a filing cabinet as a guard entered, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. It passed inches from her face. The guard muttered something about rats and left. McKenna exhaled. You get what you needed? More than enough.
A name from the past. Back in her room, Emily developed the microfilm negatives in a portable darkroom kit. As the images emerged, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. In the corner of one photo, half obscured, a man standing beside von Braun wearing an American colonel's uniform. She zoomed in. The name tag read, Colonel Walter Harrison. Her stomach twisted. Harrison had been her father's commanding officer during the war, the man who'd written the letter announcing his death. If he was involved in Paperclip, the story wasn't just professional anymore. It was personal. The house by the river. 2 days later, she found Harrison's address, a white colonial house near the Tennessee River. She knocked, nerves tight as wire. The door opened to a tall, gray-haired man in civilian clothes. His face registered recognition, then caution. "Emily Ross," he said slowly. "You're James Ross's girl." "Yes, sir. My father served under you." He nodded. "Brave man. What brings you here?" She met his eyes. Operation Paperclip. The silence that followed felt like the longest minute of her life. Finally, he said, "You shouldn't have come. I think my father died because of this program." Harrison's expression softened, then hardened again. "Your father died in Europe, not here. But you brought the men responsible here. You gave them new names." He sighed, motioning her inside. "You don't understand. We had no choice. The Soviets were weeks away from taking them. If they'd gotten von Braun, they'd own the sky. So we made a deal with devils? Sometimes that's how nations survive." Emily shook her head. "Or lose their soul." Harrison looked toward the window, the rocket test towers glinting in the distance. "You think I sleep easy? Every night I see London burning. But if we're going to build weapons, better in our hands than theirs." He turned back to her. "You print this story, and you'll tear apart everything we've built since the war. Be sure that's what you want." She left without answering. Echoes of the V2. That evening, explosions thundered from the proving ground. Test launch. Emily climbed the hill behind her boarding house and watched a bright streak rise into the dusk, trailing smoke. Children on porches clapped and cheered. To them, it was the future, America's triumph. To her, it was the echo of the V2, the same scream that once haunted London. She thought of Koenig and his widow clutching the notebook, of Harrison's haunted eyes, of Dulles' signature authorizing the lie. The story had grown larger than she'd ever imagined. She opened her notebook and began to write. "In the pursuit of safety, we have imported the architects of terror. Their knowledge will take us to the stars or destroy us trying. The question is not whether America can live with its new scientists, but whether it can live with its conscience." The typewriter keys struck like hammer blows against the quiet Alabama night.
Part 4. The Leak. Huntsville, Alabama, April 1952. The morning the story escaped her control began like any other. Gray sky, distant thunder from the test range, the smell of rain on red clay. Emily Ross sat at her typewriter, polishing the opening lines of her exposé, every keystroke a heartbeat. She planned to send the piece to her editor in D.C. by registered post. Safe, secret, perfect. Then the radio cracked to life. The Washington Sentinel reports that Nazi scientists employed by the U.S. Army are building long-range rockets at a facility in Alabama. She froze. Someone had leaked her notes, early drafts, half finished, without context. The announcer's voice rolled on, quoting phrases she'd written in her private journal. A bargain with the devil. Her stomach turned to ice. Within an hour, the streets of Huntsville were crawling with military police. Reporters from rival papers camped outside the arsenal gates. Colonel Harrison's name had been mentioned on air. Von Braun's face flashed across every television set. Emily knew what would follow. Damage control, denials, and the hunt for whoever had talked. The colonel's visit. By noon, there was a knock at her boarding house door. 2 MPs flanked Harrison, who looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "They want you in Washington." "I didn't leak it," she answered. "I believe you. They won't." He hesitated. Dulles is furious. He wants containment. Containment? That means silence. She glanced at her suitcase under the bed. Koenig's notebook inside. If they searched, the evidence would vanish. "Give me 10 minutes," she said. When they left her alone, she slipped the notebook into a canvas pouch and tied it beneath her skirt with a length of twine. Then she followed them to the waiting jeep, rain beginning to fall in heavy, red mud drops. The interrogation. The Army's regional office looked like any courthouse. Fluorescent lights, tile floors, the hum of typewriters. But behind one locked door, the atmosphere changed. The air smelled of cigarettes and cold coffee. A man in a dark suit sat across from her. Neither Army nor journalist. His tie pin bore a tiny silver eagle. "Miss Ross," he said, voice smooth as glass. "I'm Agent Keller, Central Intelligence Agency. Let's discuss your article." "I haven't published anything," she said. He smiled thinly. "Someone did, with material that originated from you. You've compromised national security." "I exposed a secret program importing Nazi officers under false names." "You exposed the men who will keep us alive if Stalin pushes the button. You think the public can stomach that their rockets come from Germany? You'll hand the Soviets a propaganda victory." He leaned closer. "Hand over every document you have, the notebook, the photographs." Emily met his eyes. "You already have the originals. You just want my silence." His expression didn't change. "You're an intelligent woman. Use that intelligence and walk away." When she said nothing, he stood. "Escort Miss Ross to quarters. She'll remain under protection until further notice." Protection. The word sounded like a cage. That night, a storm swept through Huntsville, thunder shaking the windows. The guard posted outside her room looked bored, his chair tipped against the wall. Emily waited until his head began to nod, then slipped the wire from the lamp cord and shorted the room's light. When he came to check the bulb, she stepped behind him and swung the chair hard. He dropped soundlessly. Within minutes, she was outside, soaked to the bone, the notebook still bound under her skirt. The sirens began almost immediately, slicing through the rain.
She ran toward the launch field, the only place still lit. A rocket towered there, slim, silver, its nose aimed at the black sky. Technicians shouted through the wind, unaware of the chaos beyond the fence. A figure stepped from the shadows, Captain McKenna, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Jesus, Ross, they'll shoot you!" "I have to get this out." Koenig's notebook. Proof Dulles authorized everything. McKenna looked torn. "You'll ruin me." "You can help save the truth." He hesitated, then handed her his Jeep keys. "There's a radio shack 5 miles east, civilian frequency. You can transmit before they cut the lines. Go." She squeezed his hand once and ran.
The broadcast. The Radio Shack was little more than a $10 on stilts above a cotton field. Emily threw open the door, dripping water onto the boards. The ham operator inside, a college kid with headphones, blinked at her. "Federal emergency," she said, flashing the press badge. "I need your transmitter." Within minutes, she had tuned to the shortwave frequency that reached Washington newsrooms. Her voice shook as she read aloud the contents of Koenig's notebook. Names, transfers, the Dulles authorization. She ended with one line that came from her heart, not her notes. "America cannot build its future on the forgotten crimes of its past." The operator stared at her, awestruck. "You just started a war," he whispered. The launch. Back at Redstone, the countdown reached 0. The rocket roared skyward, cutting through the storm, thunder answering from heaven. In the control bunker, Von Braun watched the trajectory monitor. Perfect ascent, perfect arc. History made. But even as the room erupted in applause, a telex printer clattered in the corner, spitting out urgent bulletins. "Sentinel breaks paperclip story. CIA denies involvement. President requests investigation." Von Braun read the first line and exhaled slowly. "So," he murmured in German, "the past finds us after all." The road north. Emily and McKenna met again 2 nights later at a gas station outside Nashville. The newspaper screamed of hearings, denials, and missing documents. "You did it," he said. "The country's awake." "For now," she replied. "They'll bury it again when it's convenient." He glanced at the horizon. "Where will you go?" "Where stories can't be classified." She smiled faintly. "Maybe New York, maybe nowhere." As she drove away, the night was clear, the stars sharp as glass. Somewhere far above, the Redstone rocket arced across the stratosphere. Proof of genius, proof of compromise. She whispered to the dark, "We reached the heavens on the wings of ghosts."